Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Earlier this year, I sponsored the bill to reauthorize the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards Program, which passed the House 409-1, but unfortunately has stalled in the Senate, and the program has since expired. Secretary Mayorkas, I know you share my concern about the lapse in this program, and I would like to return to your testimony about the potential impact of the lapse in the CFATS program, and specifically, would you speak to the role DHS has in the inspection of chemical facilities and how that changes when the program is allowed to lapse?
Thank you very much for your support, Congresswoman, of the CFATS program. It is vitally necessary to the protection of not only the communities that surround the particular facility, but America as a whole. Without the CFATS authority, we're unable to inspect facilities and ensure their compliance with standards that protect us against very, very dangerous chemicals. And we are fortunate that we have not had an incident that has been a dramatic example of why this authority is so vitally needed.
Do you believe the likelihood or the threat of such an incident potentially occurring is greater when the program is allowed to lapse?
Absolutely, because what we are able to do is ensure that the standards are being enforced and that best security practices are being followed. And when we are not able to inspect and enforce those standards, we see facilities not employing them and creating a significant vulnerability.
Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas. Director Wray, I appreciate the testimony that you've given and the information that you've shared about your internal efforts at the FBI to address FISA reform and to address taking steps to address abuses to the 702 program and within the FISC, and would like to discuss that issue with you. The House Committee on Judiciary and Intelligence have worked to come up with FISA reform ideas and legislation that would protect American civil liberties while still ensuring that law enforcement has the ability to conduct lawful and necessary surveillance. With the expiration looming at the end of 2023 and the threats that you've described ever increasing to our homeland, I'd like to touch on how the FISA program itself and the 702 program assist in preventing plots to harm Americans and potential threats to the homeland. Would you please elaborate on why 702 is an important part of your work?
So 702 is critical to protecting Americans from foreign terrorist threats. If you think about why 702 was enacted in the first place, even though it's focused on foreign adversaries overseas presenting national security threats, the whole reason we have it is to protect Americans here in the homeland from those threats. And that part is the FBI's part in running U.S. person queries, among other things. If you have a foreign terrorist organization overseas, any one of those ones that I listed off in my opening statement, who decides to task an operative here or to direct an attack here, it is more likely than not that 702 is going to be the thing that would allow us to anticipate or detect that. If we were to deliberately blind ourselves to that information, we are taking a wildly irresponsible risk, in my view. To give you an example, something like 100% of our technically sourced intelligence about Hamas comes from 702. That's just one terrorist organization. So why we would blind ourselves to that when it's not constitutionally required, somebody needs to be able to explain to the families of terrorist victims of the future why something that we were not constitutionally required to do, we just decided to do, it made them and their family members less safe.
In your written testimony, you specifically touch on the concept of a warrant requirement related to U.S. person queries in the 702 database and your assessment that that would hamper law enforcement's ability and the intelligence community's ability to do their work and utilize the database. Would you explain why it is you believe that a warrant requirement for U.S. persons queries would be a challenge or a hurdle for you all to continue to do that work?
Well, the first thing I would say is that it's quite clear under the case law that a warrant is not required constitutionally to run a U.S. person query. This is information that is already lawfully collected, and it's our ability to run queries of the information that's already lawfully collected. The second thing, though, is that the stage in an investigation where 702 is really used is at the front end to quickly figure out, what are we dealing with here? Do we have a threat? Do we have to pursue? So agility and speed are of the essence. And trying to get a warrant requirement at the front end in that stage is really a non-starter. The delay that it would cause in allowing us to connect the dots, which is what's happening when our people are running U.S. person queries, it would basically make the tool largely useless. The other thing that I think people tend to forget when they talk about a warrant requirement is that the vast majority of our U.S. person querying is to identify victims, in particular of cyber attacks. And there's no warrant that anybody would be getting to be able to run a query of a victim term. So we would be essentially putting ourselves in a position where we wouldn't be able to protect American infrastructure from Iranian cyber attacks, Chinese cyber attacks, Russian cyber attacks, North Korean cyber attacks. So again, I think I understand the mindset. We take very seriously our role as stewards of these important authorities. That's why I'm so committed to the reforms that we have made. That's why I'm so gratified by the findings by the FISA court and other outside entities about the effectiveness of those reforms. But please, please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. I now recognize Ms. Clark